Hey everyone, and Happy New Year. I can't believe we're at 2024 already, and I really can't believe that we're kicking off the 90 Days of DevOps 2024 Community Edition. We've got some amazing sessions from the community for the community. I'm really just going to kick off about what is 90 Days of DevOps, where it started from, why I started it, and some of those like boring bits to kick things off before we get into some amazing content. I hope it's useful for everyone. I think there's a bit of everything for everyone. It's not completely washed with AI like 2023 kind of was. So yeah, with that, let's get into 90 Days of DevOps and the 2024 edition. So firstly, welcome. If you've stumbled across this video, hopefully you've seen either some noise around it on social media, maybe you've been following it since 2022 when we started creating some of this content that really started as me taking some notes, and we'll get into that shortly. And last year, where we got some help from the community, from some friends within the community, and where we are now, and what we're just about to kick off with the 2024 edition. I think it's important to go back to like the history of 90 Days of DevOps and how it started, and it kind of started in October of 2021. I wrote a blog, so you want to learn DevOps. I've just refactored that. It's on veeam.com if you want to go and find that. I'll try and remember to put the links down and do all of that good stuff that YouTubers do. But really it hit on some of those key fundamentals or foundational things that we need to know when it comes to DevOps. And for those familiar with the first quarter of the year, if you're in sales or familiar with that, you'll know that from January the 1st to March the 31st is 90 days. So because obviously February is only 28 days normally, 2024 happens to be a leap year, so we'll come up with something what needs to happen there. 91 days of DevOps, probably something like that. So really I took that blog post, and what I wanted to do, I had a lot of gaps in my DevOps knowledge, and some of the other areas around that. There's a YouTube video on this channel that talks about my journey, about having to transition into a new role, and just knowing infrastructure as code from a virtualization and cloud perspective wasn't enough. I needed to now understand containerization. I needed to know a little bit more about the developer side of the house, not necessarily learning a programming language, although we delved into that, and some of them things, and we'll get onto that as we go through this. So who am I? First and foremost, is I very much come from the infrastructure background. My beginnings was building computers, building servers at a small company called World of Computers in Cambridge, and I was supplying those with or to Cambridge universities and surrounding businesses. And then I moved into being a systems administrator. Now, what does that mean? And I think systems administrator is very similar to what we see when it comes to, oh, I'm a DevOps engineer. Not necessarily looking after the same things, but one man's or one person's DevOps engineer could be very different from company to company, or even within the same company. A DevOps engineer skill set could be different in that term. And I think that could be the same could be said about systems administrators, is that they're all different and they're evolving as well. And I actually think systems administrator was a perfectly good way of defining that keeping the lights on, creating, bringing automation, doing all the stuff that we're ultimately going to talk about over the next 90 days around the principles and processes of DevOps. It's the evolution of the sysadmin, and I've done some sessions around this. After being that sysadmin, I then moved into the reseller world, and I started to understand a bit more about virtualization, about storage, enterprise storage and enterprise virtualization. And I heard this terminology around VMware and NetApp storage, and it was blowing up, and Cisco networking and Cisco UCS. And with that, I settled, and I really wanted to learn more about these areas, and I wanted to really focus on them. So my first iteration of learning in public and learning out there and finding a community was very much that infrastructure, virtualization, storage environment. And then in 2021, the beginning of 2021 2021, I was leaped into looking after an acquisition that we'd made from a technologist standpoint with a company called Kasten, which is focused on Kubernetes backup. But for me to really understand Kubernetes backup, I needed to not just understand Kubernetes, containerization, and the whole DevOps mindset and why we need to protect that data. How do we provision that workload? How do we look after that and go from version 1 to version 2, etc. I've been at Veeam for almost 9 years in March of 2024, so quite a while been in that position. I started off as an SE, and then I progressed into the office of the CTO, where I again, my focus is around cloud native, and our open source projects. Speaking of open source projects, we have 3 notable mentions. Probably the biggest one is Canister. We released that at KubeCon North America in Chicago as a CNCF sandbox project. And basically what that is an application level framework that enables us to orchestrate backups of our databases or data services within Kubernetes. And the other 2, just to mention, is Kubester, is around storage or benchmarking storage within your Kubernetes cluster, and then Navigate, which is a way of visualizing and controlling your Helm charts within that. But anyway, that's enough about me. Let's get into what is the project, what have we done so far. Probably the biggest question that I get asked is, where do I start? Do I start at the 2023? Do I start with 2024? And actually, my answer's changed or at least now, because I think the 2024 one is now, it's today, and we're learning a perspective, not from me, not from a couple of SMEs, subject matter experts, but actually from the community. The people that are out there in the field, a much broader perspective, which I think is amazing from this point of view. Okay, so if you've just stumbled across this video and you have no idea what 90 Days of DevOps is, well, the mission was to take back in 2022 and ongoing from that is to take 90 days of consecutive learning around the topic of DevOps and the tooling, the processes, the principles, the theory, getting hands-on to gain that foundational knowledge. Don't get me wrong, you're not going to walk out the back of this, even if you do 2022, 2023 and watch all of these videos, you're probably not going to walk into a DevOps engineer role. I do this because there's a reason for that. For DevOps engineers, should anyone be called DevOps engineers other than to get a bit of extra cash, right? But if you click that QR code, you're going to go to the repo and you're going to find some stuff that I'll demonstrate shortly. Okay, so big focus around this is around learning in public. And actually, when we first started, it wasn't about learning in public. It was me really just taking some notes on my GitHub repo to learn a little bit more about the Git functionality and Git-based services such as GitHub. It turned out that actually basically every day of the 2022 edition was me writing a blog post. And people seem to like that. And it was useful for some. Hopefully it was useful for many. Hopefully it was useful for you. If you're here and you've followed that journey and you've been through all of those, you'll understand a bit more about the project. But the important 3 areas that I've kind of lived by as an ethic since starting to learn in my technology journey in the industry that we're in is we're never going to be done learning. And you need to accept that, because like I went from an infrastructure and virtualization and storage cycle, we then moved to cloud, and then we moved to SaaS, and we have now cloud native, and we have and so on and so forth. We have to be reinventing ourselves, but also relearning or learning new areas of our grasp. I know a lot of people also that over the last 18 months, 2 years, have transitioned into more security focused content or security focused roles, because that's the requirement out there. If we want to stay relevant in our space and we want to keep a job, then we have to be relevant, and that means we have to learn new topics. So what else is it? It's about sharing and learning in public, blogs, videos, etc. I watch far too many YouTube videos. I think that was a thing of the pandemic, but I watch a lot, and a lot of that isn't like personal stuff. It's very focused around technology, whether it be developer focused or whether it be infrastructure or home lab. or even desk setups. I watch that because I learn from that. But equally, I want to then give back to the community by sharing my learning experience. And that's really what the premise behind the 90 Days of DevOps really was. And also make content that you'd use. So when you think about 90 Days of DevOps, and when you first look at that 2022 edition, you'll see each one of those is a blog post, but it's me going through that. I went through that. I wrote that down because these are notes that if I Google something, I sometimes find my own content that reminds me, oh yeah, I did that. And the muscle memory comes back. But make content and share it publicly. Who cares if anyone actually reads it? If it helps one person, then my motto is if it helps one person, then it's worth doing. Okay, so let's take a look at the project as it stands today. So as I'm recording this, I cheated a little. This is the 31st. It's New Year's Eve. Just before we get started with friends coming over and all of that good stuff, I wanted to really cover a bit more about where we are, what's the state of the repository before we start. I've kind of gone into a bit of the reason as to why it's a GitHub repo. I wanted to cut my teeth. I wanted to learn more about that. But let's touch on some of these key areas. So first of all, it started as a repository where I started making my notes. You can see here that we're 24,500 GitHub stars. Are they a vanity metric? Potentially. Does it mean that people are actually looking and finding it useful? I hope so. I get a lot of comments, a lot of messages on Twitter, on social media about the project, so I'm hoping that it was useful. Also, the 500 plus people watching the projects for new content, and then just shy of 6,000 forks, meaning people have taken a copy of this to go back to later or even run through their own journey. I know a lot of people, if you search for 90 Days of DevOps on YouTube, on Twitter, especially that hashtag, it's not just me bleating stuff out there. It's actually other people are creating content around their own journey. Some fantastic stuff from the community there already that hopefully you can find it useful. Probably the biggest thing that blew me away was the contributors. So again, I'm not a professional writer. I do write a lot of content. I do write a lot of blogs professionally as well for my job. But for people to come in and correct things and contribute or correct some of the areas that we have, we've had over 100 contributors to the project. I think that's incredible, and we'll get into some of that detail later on. We also created a Discord. Now, it's a little bit quiet for my liking. One of my goals for 2024 and this project in particular is let's not necessarily grow the number of members. That doesn't matter to me, the numbers. But what does matter is how can we make it engaging and how can we make it useful? I was very reluctant to create a Discord for the project because in my eyes, we're closing the door on the wider world. And unless you're a member, then you're not going to see the conversations, the content that is shared in there. So I begrudgingly created this, but I'd like to actually make it useful. And we're going to start some monthly calls in there. Potentially some of the community members are going to help with that. And you can see here how that rocket ship Star History helped and started that grow. And we can see that we're starting to plateau out. And I'm okay with that. Again, are stars a vanity metric? Who knows? But we know that people are using the project. Now, importantly, the reason why we're changing that media type to video for 2024 is one, it's an easy way to consume. And some people don't necessarily want to read 110,000 words, which is what ended up the size of the 2022 edition. The other crazy thing that I want to mention and call out here is the translations that have happened to the repository, to the project. So you can see that there's several Asian translations in there, some Polish and other language as well. And I think that's incredible that someone took the time not only to learn on the go, but to then translate that to help a wider community understand and learn some more of the fundamentals and the foundations of what we went through. So if we look back about what we started and what 2022 was. It was about what is and why do we use DevOps. It was about learning a programming language. Now, I say learning a programming language, even if you watch people like Theo, people like Primogen on YouTube, or Melky as a newer developer that started to create content, or Coding with Lewis, is I think it's fair to say that you're never done learning a programming language, let alone learning new tech or new things. So the reason behind me wanting to learn that Golang, and that's why you see that logo there, and there's a big part in there around, should it be Go or should it be Python? And I think it depends on, if you want a more versatile option, then maybe Python is the way to go. The reason why I went with Go is because our product Kasten K10 is written in Golang. So I wanted to have a better understanding of that. Plus, when you look at Kubernetes, you look at Docker, you look at other projects, other new cloud native workloads, applications, they're written in Go as well. So I really wanted to dive into that. Also, understanding Linux basics, like go and grab yourself a Linux desktop for a couple of months and you'll learn so much. Understanding networking, is it the most exciting? Yeah, it is for some, but how do we understand the OSI layer? How do we understand? And these are just spending 7 days on each of these topics to get a better grasp and an understanding of these. And there's some amazing content that I watched that I was shared in those 7 days around networking. People that can make it more exciting than what I can write in content. A cloud provider, learning one cloud provider to start with, because ultimately when you learn one, whether it be Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or Amazon, you're going to have a better understanding when you go to the next one. So we started with Azure. That came from a very scientific Twitter poll, a very close one at that, and that allowed us to dive into the cloud. Using Git effectively, both Git locally as a version control system, but also Git-based services such as GitHub, and then in turn GitHub Actions that we get to later on when we get to the CI/CD pipelines. Containers, Kubernetes, they kind of come hand in hand. Obviously, you can run containers standalone, but again, in my new role, I was having to understand and learn a lot more about these areas. So I wanted to share the foundation, the fundamentals. Can you learn containers in 7 days? Can you learn Kubernetes in 7 days? No. You could do 100 days of Kubernetes. Shout out to Anais there, who started that project that I'd like to think that actually led to where this project actually started from. But actually, even before 100 days of Kubernetes, we've got to give a shout out to GPS, or Made by GPS, and so Gwyneth and Rishab, who's also helped on this project where they started 100 days of cloud, where they focused on cloud projects in there. So again, just a big shout out to community members that start making you think about how you could relay your message and your learning in public. Then we focused on some learning infrastructure as code. I'd already done quite a lot with Terraform, HashiCorp Ambassador, and all of that good stuff. So I wanted to actually highlight some of the benefits of infrastructure as code. And in fact, a big shout out here is around Pulumi. We have a lot of Pulumi sessions in the 90 days. So give them a watch. Some really smart things coming out of the Pulumi camp. Then moving into the application layer, so the configuration management, things like Ansible. How do we also not only deliver the infrastructure as code, but how do we now configure the application and keep that in a desired state as well, using things like Ansible. CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Jenkins always comes top of mind here, but you're also going to see things like Argo CD and GitHub Actions that fall into that. We go into that in a lot more detail. Things like observability and data visualization, Grafana, the Elk Stack, Prometheus, etc. all give a requirement that you need to understand a little bit more about this. And then I probably couldn't have done the project without mentioning something about how do we store and protect this data? How do we make sure that our data is good when bad things happen, and we all know that bad things happen, cybersecurity threats, ransomware, etc. But equally, who's accidentally deleted something from their machine? Yeah, everyone has. Okay, so the story so far, it was 90 days, basically 90 blogs. It was my perspective and learning. It was 110,000 words. It was my personal notes, and that got us up to the 20,000 plus stars that you saw in the initial. And it was basically covering those 13 topics that we just went over. So let's take a look at the repo. So we do have a website on top. Big shout out to Rashab for getting that sorted. So if you go to 90daysofdevops.com, you will get to a GitHub pages. But if you go to the GitHub, and there's links in that website to this GitHub, and you go to the image 2022, you'll see how it's laid out. We have an introduction, what is and why do we use DevOps, learning a programming language, and each one of these is starting with a big picture. Why? What is the fundamental reason why we need to consider a programming language alongside DevOps? Why do we need a programming language? Because we could leverage that programming language to automate some of our tasks, create CLIs, do all of that good stuff. Then we get into some theory around what that looks like. So with the cloud, you can understand what the storage, what the networking, what the compute looks like. And then we get into some practical hands-on stuff. And another key part of this was around how do we make this accessible? How do we make sure that everyone across the world with just their laptop and an internet connection can make sure that they can get that hands-on experience? Because not everyone's got a credit card that they can throw into AWS or into any cloud or into any software that they need to download locally. So what we very much focused on was, I want community edition tools and software, or I want free editions, open source projects that we can leverage here. So that then brings us on to 2023, and this is where I got some help from my community friends. So one of the big things in 2022 that we missed out on was security. Security, if you remember at the beginning or at the end of 2022, was a massive thing. It still is today. We see it in the news all the time around cybersecurity, ransomware, and all of that good stuff, and also supply chain security. So I went out there and, well, I didn't. I basically asked the community who's the right people to talk about this on a 7-day, 7-blog type period. So we went out and we covered some of those areas. So what is DevSecOps? I went over that. What's the big picture? Why is it important? What's happened? Why are we talking about it here? We then went into secure coding, continuous build, integration, and testing. So following on from what we covered in the 2022 edition, and we went a little bit lower, but how do we need, or how should we incorporate security into these processes? We touched on continuous delivery and deployment. We touched on runtime defense and monitoring. We touched on secrets management, heavily focused around HashiCorp Vault in there. We then went back to, okay, what else did we miss out? So once we'd covered those key areas, and by all means, we haven't hit all of the security features, but we then wanted to go, okay, so last time we covered Golang, who's best to cover things like Python? Who's best to, we covered Azure in the first iteration, who's the best person to cover AWS? We covered Kubernetes, but we're seeing a huge growth around Red Hat OpenShift, so who's the best person to cover Red Hat OpenShift? Then we covered storing and protecting data, and actually there was some elements of databases and what is a database as a very high level, but Taylor and Andrew went through, well, okay, what are the different types of databases and what are some of the options that we have in the cloud, PaaS-based, but also equally open source and all of that good stuff, and why do we have these? Then into serverless, service mesh, and then finishing it up with engineering for day 2 ops, kind of similar to what we saw, but what does an API actually mean? How do we use it? Okay, and then same premise. You go to the repository, scroll down. So I would always say start at the 2022 edition, but pick out the modules that you want. You don't have to go through from day one. So you go into 2023, you see that list that I just showed you with all the authors on there. And then we get into the content. So each one, DevSecOps, what's the big picture? Think like an attacker. We actually build a very weak app because it's easy to build very weak apps, and you'll see there. Then we get into some more detail as we go down. AWS, Red Hat OpenShift, databases, serverless, service mesh, etc. And then we wrap that all up at the end of that. Okay, so here we are. We're 25 minutes in. I've been very conscious that a lot of our sessions need to be around that 30-minute mark. So I'm going to zip through this very quickly and basically introduce what is the 2024 Community Edition and what does it mean to us from a project point of view. So firstly, again, if you go to that, you've got your images to go through 2022, 2023, and now 2024. If you go to this page, you will see an introduction to what it is, but then you're going to see the agenda. And on each day, hopefully, we're going to see all of these speakers from the community, unique speakers. We have at least 90 speakers going to talk here, and 90 unique sessions with a wide range of diversity and diversity topics across that. So hopefully we're going to have all 90, at least 90 sessions, but you'll also see that we've got some additional points here at the end. So sessions at the end that are accepted as sessions, just in case life happens. People can't always get their content through the door. But I want this to be a continuation. I want this to help the community. I want this to grow as a platform and all of that good stuff. So with that QR code is going to get you to that repo. My last thing, my closing is get learning, get involved. Even if it's just come and be curious. Go and ask questions in the Discord. If you don't want to join Discord because it's slowing down seemingly, then jump into social media. Find me, ask me a question. If I don't know it, I'm pretty sure I can find someone that does know something about it in the community. So with that, I hope you're excited. Just another 89 sessions to go. We'll be releasing the videos on a daily basis, so hopefully that drives some momentum and some interesting topics and thoughts. Obviously, you can comment down below. I'm going to keep that open. So hopefully hopefully you just find this useful to get involved. We've got a wide range of speakers, topics, all of that good stuff. So with that, have fun, ask questions, be curious, get learning, get involved. Thank you.